going to have a porch talk this morning about a topic that I think is worthy of talking about. I saw a reel yesterday. I thought it was brilliant. I really thought it was a brilliant idea. Instead of a reel where people were dancing to a certain kind of music, this person had done research into older people complaining about younger people being too wild and immoral through the ages. And they started with the most modern quote, like in 2006 or something from the New York Times about that generation, the young people, having no morals and misbehaving. And then each page went back so many years, and it went through the the 20th century, then the 19th century, then the 17th century, and then it got into medieval times and the Renaissance period, and it went back all the way to the 4th century BC. And there was a quote, I think it was Horace, saying this youth generation is too wild and has no morals, and it's going to cause the the collapse of civilization. And that's basically what each one of these quotes said. And I thought about that for a minute because, again, in our world, America thinks of ourselves as an established nation, but we're just a baby nation compared to China or Rome or even England or Ireland. I read a history book on Ireland that said 5,000 years BC is the last, bit of information that they have about the beginning of people living on that island. 5,000 BC. And researchers in England, archaeologists, are doing archaeological digs and finding really old stuff on their island. And National Geographic was doing archaeological digs down in South America somewhere on a coast and found what they thought were 30,000-year-old remains. And even here in North America, research is ongoing, and now they're saying no, they think it's more like 100,000 years ago, that the southeastern Orientals people came across the land bridge and settled in America and became what we think of as our Native Americans. So there's, in the span of that kind of history, 250 years is just a tiny little thing. Well, then, if you think about how many generations that is since the country was a nation, not since the first Europeans came here or even the first natives came here, but since the establishment of the United States of America, that's really only 3 or 4 generations if you think about them as being approximately 80 years old. Now, lifespans weren't as long in the old days, so maybe a generation lasted only 30 or 40 years. So maybe there's 6 generations in American history for like the Mayflower families or something. That's not a lot. That's not a lot. And so now that I'm of an age where I have 50 years of memories and a little bit more, I've seen this nation change. And it is in a decline morally and ethically, because in my day there were so many things that you wouldn't dream of doing. You were taught how to behave and that you wouldn't cheat people or take advantage of people, that you would be helpful, that if you established a hospital, it wasn't so you could make people sicker, or if you made a pharmaceutical company, it was not to make people sicker. You were actually trying to heal people. You were trying to help people. And so many of our pioneer scientists and doctors and everything did improve people's lives by experimenting and creating medicines and vaccines for things like tetanus and rabies. I mean, just imagine, right, what the world would be like with no tetanus shots, no rabies shots. People would be dying in childhood because there's so many things that, animals, rabid animals would bite people. They would bite other animals. They were spreading rabies, and just vaccines for the dogs and for people have brought rabies to a very, very small amount. In America, it's usually bats that are, pretty isolated, that are causing cases of rabies and tetanus and whooping cough and, in the tropics, typhoid and cholera and all sorts of things. So my generation, they're calling us boomers. Our childhoods were very stable. We were a generation that could run around outside and play and not worry about a mountain lion or a bear taking you away. People were generally moral. I'm not saying they were not criminals. Of course, there were criminals, but the criminals kind of kept to their element. And so, middle class Americans, like my family, I had a pretty good upbringing. I had a fairly normal upbringing. Even when my father passed away when I was 10, my mother kept us on sort of a narrow path, and she was a cultured woman. She was someone who introduced us to plays and music and literature and traveling and museums and things. And so that's what I brought into our family. And now all three of my children are teachers, all three of them, which they're not just any teacher. They are top of the line teachers. They are cream of the crop. They are super intelligent teachers that are going to be teaching their students the things they know and making all their students smarter. So I feel like I have a little bit of footing to stand on when I say things like, there's things wrong with our society right now. There are things that are being pushed on people, unfair laws, and the government is weak. Look at our border. It's ridiculous what's happening on our border. And border control is something the Constitution says the government is supposed to do. And it's a ploy to make you think your government is weak. And that's exactly what they're doing. We have a weak president. We have a weak Congress and Senate. None of them are willing to stand on, real principles. There's a lot of this, and no actions being taken. That's all by design. That is to weaken our society, because there are people who want this society to change. And I don't see it as change for the good. I don't. So I made a comment on that reel. And there were a lot of really good comments, really snarky comments, truthful comments, sarcastic comments. And I said something like, okay, if you look at the fact that we've had rebellious teenagers since the 4th century BC, through every generation, that tells me that people, young people especially, are just stiff-necked and stubborn. That, at least for Israelites, not every culture had rules and commandments, but some did. It was against the law. Excuse me, I have to sneeze. In some cultures, to steal, to murder, because it's very hard to make a strong culture, a big culture, a developed culture, when it's constantly being undermined by the people in it. And stealing and murdering is not just morally wrong, but it makes the fabric of the culture weaker. It's like you're building with building blocks, and every time you steal something, you're taking a building block away. Every time a person is murdered, just imagine it. If you're a little town and suddenly someone murders your blacksmith, you have no one to make tools, to make nails, to fix the animals' feet that are doing all the work for you. If we put it in a modern time, if you have a doctor for a community or a town and somebody murders them, now everyone's going to get sick and die. Those sins, those crimes, take away the building block of your culture. And if we still have young people who are being immoral and unethical, and also elder people in positions of power, they are going to drain the culture. They're going to pull the building blocks out and make it all fall down, so then they can rise from the chaos, out of chaos control, and form a culture that suits their fancy. And in America, we're based on capitalism, so money is important, and businessmen want to make money, and they don't care about people's feelings. They just want to sell, sell, sell. How much can you sell? How many billions trillions can you make and really change what life is like for a human being most of the time? Still got to get up in the morning. Still got to have some food in your stomach. You have to protect yourself from the elements. You don't necessarily have to have a vehicle, but you do travel. Like, even if you're going to provide your own food, you walk to your garden, you walk to your animals and check on them. You protect yourself from the weather, you have some kind of clothing on, and you're susceptible to illnesses. And it doesn't matter if you have $1 trillion, all the rules of life on planet Earth still apply to you. Sure, you can fly your plane all over the planet, but you can't fly your plane into outer space. And if you go in outer space is still a hostile environment. It doesn't change because you have trillions of dollars. Sure, you can try to live out in there, but you still have to have oxygen and food. And I did a video on this many years ago. We are living in a closed, it's like a box. We have boundaries to what we can do, and no amount of money will change that. You can go undersea, you can go up in the air, but you are still a human. So I don't know. I think probably the best thing to do when you're an adult and you have children is try to teach them morals. Try to make them a building block for the culture instead of someone who's undermining the culture. All right, y'all. Bless you. Thank you for watching this video. Please comment. I'd love to hear what you think about it. Shalom.